August is Women in Translation Month, so today let's talk about 6 French authors that you can read in English, as well as some other recommendations. Hello friends and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kat and I talk about books, writing and other cozy things. Today I'm very excited to be talking about some French authors who are available in translation, and the topic of translation in general is a topic that I'm very passionate about and interested in because I used to work as a translator, albeit not a literary translator, even though I would love to do that at some point. So I have 6 French authors that I want to talk to you today, as well as some recommendations from other countries and then a couple of books about translation. The first book is Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan. This book was published initially in 1954 when the author was only 18 years old, and it was an instant success. A bit of a sulphurous one as well because of the content of the book. So Bonjour Tristesse is the story of Cécile, who is a 17-year-old French girl spending the summer with her father and his current mistress in a luxurious villa in the Costa Riviera in France, I think, something like that. So in the south, sunny, beautiful region for rich people. And so Cécile is enjoying a lot of freedom. She gets along well with Elsa, his father's mistress, who is much younger. And she has her first romance as well in this story. But things start to take a turn when her father invites Anne to the house. Anne is a woman who is closer in age to him, and she soon becomes his lover. So Elsa leaves the house and Anne starts to take on a motherly role towards Cécile, which she does not appreciate because she feels like her very free and carefree lifestyle is being threatened by Anne. And so she started to scheme against the woman. Again, this was written when Françoise Sagan was very, very young, and she was immediately recognized for her particular style of writing. And I think it was described as her little music. So this has definitely been translated into English, as well as several of her other books. She was a very prolific author. She tended to write pretty short books, so those are quite easy and quick to read, but they still have quite a big emotional punch, I would say. They are more in the character study kind of category. Next, we have Simone de Beauvoir, who was a very famous philosopher and feminist. She is the author of The Second Sex, for example. This is her memoir. I think the title in English might be Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, something like this. This is the first tome of her memoirs, and it recounts her youth and her formative years when she was a child and then studying, and when she met Sartre, another very famous French philosopher. It's a very interesting read to get an understanding of her life, how she became the philosopher and feminist that she ended up being, her relationship with Sartre, the cultural scene in France at the time, and all of that. So again, I think the rest of her memoirs are also translated. There is a lot of her works that you can find in translation in English, and this is the one I would recommend to start with. Moving on to magical realism, this is The Book of Nights by Sylvie Germain. This follows a French family across several generations. So it goes through, I think, 3 wars, a war from the 19th century and then the First and Second World War. And what's kind of special about this book, again, is the presence of magical realism, which is fairly rare in French literature. And the prose of this book is so luscious and rich and purple, and I love it to bits. It's a fantastic story. The premise was not really something I was really interested in, but I read this for my creative writing masters, and again I was blown away by Sylvie Germain's prose. I've heard this compared to 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I think it's kind of the French version, and again would really recommend it if you're interested in getting into French literature. Another contemporary writer is Maylis de Kerangal, who I have talked about quite a few times already on this channel. I think several of her books have been translated into English, but the one I would recommend the most is Réparer les vivants, which has been translated under 2 different titles in English, Mend the Living or The Heart. This book is the story of Simon's heart, and it's really the story of the heart, not the story of Simon. One morning, Simon goes surfing with a group of his friends, and unfortunately he is caught in a car accident that leaves him brain dead. So he is effectively dead, but his heart is still beating, and that makes him a perfect candidate to be an organ donor. So this is the story of the heart, like the trajectory of this organ through the whole process of organ donation. It's a fascinating story, and the prose is also quite interesting. Maylis de Kerangal has this style where she sometimes likes to weave quite long sentences, but they do flow quite easily. They do flow like a wave. There is very much this motif in the book of the wave. And she will encrust some technical terms in there among the rest of the sentence. It's still very understandable, but I love the difference of register in her writing. I could talk about this book for hours. Actually, I did during my master's, but that's not the point today. In short, I would recommend, if the topic interests you, if you're interested in French literature, this has been a massive, massive success in France. It's won so many prizes. So yeah, if you want to get into the French literature scene, definitely have to pick this one up. For some non-fiction, I would recommend the books by Chollet. This one is one about beauty. I don't know the title in English. I'm not sure this one has been translated. I think in English she's most known for her book about witches. I will insert the cover here. So she is a French journalist writing feminist books about a variety of topics. This is very high quality non-fiction. I would highly, highly recommend if you want a good feminist read in translation. And then it could not be a video from me without a fantasy recommendation, especially if it's about French books in translation. I cannot avoid talking about the Mirror Visitor series by Christelle Dabos, especially the first book, A Winter's Promise, which is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. This book follows Ophelia, who is an animist. So she is living in an arch where people have special powers around objects. She is able to read the past of an object, but she also has another power that's much, much less common. She is a mirror visitor, which means that she is able to travel between mirrors. And so in this story, we are following this very interesting and intriguing character as she is about to be married off to a very mysterious and unfriendly man from another arch. So in this world, the planet kind of exploded in different arches, and so they are kind of pieces of Earth scattered across the universe, and people live on those kind of big rocks with cities and countrysides and everything on them. So she is married off to Thorn, and to do that she is sent to his heart, which is the pole, the one that is furthest away. And so we follow her on this journey to get married off, to go to a new place, to learn the codes and kind of political rules that are happening over there, because Thorn's situation is not an easy one and involves a lot of political intrigues that Ophelia will have to navigate. Again, this book is fantastic. I still need to reread the rest of the series, and I remember that maybe they're not all as strong, but I've reread this at the end of last year and loved it even more than the first time. There is great neurodivergence representation in this. It is supposed to be YA, but I think it's quite a mature book in the themes that it covers and also in the way it is written. The vocabulary, for example, is very rich and precise and very interesting. Again, I love this book and cannot recommend it highly enough. I actually have a 7th book that I want to talk about that I forgot to put aside. This is The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbery. And this is the story of Renée, who is a concierge in a French apartment building. And she is very kind of secretive. She doesn't really show herself that much and doesn't share her real self with the people that she meets. And it's also the story of Paloma, who is, I think, a 12-year-old living in that building. She is a very smart kid and she gets to know Renée, and they have quite a special bond and they develop a friendship, and it's a story of the two of them. This is a book I read years and years ago, and it's very much due a reread soon, hopefully, but I really loved it at the time I read it. I remember crying my eyes out at the train station as I finished it, and it stayed with me since then. Even though I don't remember a lot of what happens, I still remember that ending, and I still remember that I loved the book so much. So again, if you want to read a book that was very popular in France, I would highly recommend. I think it gives you kind of a insight into kind of the bourgeois apartment building living style in Paris. That's also, I guess, a bit of a character study, but also like a cultural insight into the Parisian culture. So those were the 6 books / French authors that I wanted to recommend, but I have 3 more books from women in translation I want to recommend. The first one is from a Spanish author, Irene Olmo, and this is I Do Not Want to Be a Mother. This is a little graphic novel about her desire to not become a mother. I think it's very well done. The style of illustration is pretty cute. It's a very short read, and it's also available in English, translated from the Spanish. So if you're curious on this topic, I would highly recommend this one. Then we have The Wool by Marlen Haushofer. This is the story of a woman who goes to spend a weekend in the mountains, I think in Austria. This is translated from German. And she wakes up the next morning and she's kind of trapped by this invisible wall. She's not able to get out of this part of the mountains, and she only has her dog as a companion. And from outside the wall, it looks like life has kind of stilled and everything is kind of frozen in time. And so this story is how she is kind of surviving on her own in the mountains. I've read this several years ago and I still think about this book regularly. I was quite impressed by how the author was able to capture my interest with so little, because there's not much that happened in this book. It's quite a slow read and still I found it completely gripping. So it's kind of sci-fi, a bit dystopic in a way, and it's a genre that I really love. So I really enjoy this and would highly recommend. And then finally, a Norwegian author, Herbjørg Wassmo. This is the book of Dina. I think it's probably her most famous. This is a historical fiction series. I think it's historical, but I believe there is some magical realism in there, which is somehow categorized in my mind as fantasy. But I've talked about this book quite a bit as well on this channel, and it's the story of Dina, who, when she was quite young, ended up being responsible for the death of her mother, and so her father ends up sending her away to a place where she's not really cared for really well, and turns into this very wild, uneducated woman until she gets a tutor who realizes that she is very good with math and music. So we get to see her brilliant mind finally start to shine through. Then she needs to return to her birth home when she is married to an older man who ends up dying, and then she ends up having to run the estate with a firm hand. This is the story of this character. She is quite a interesting, wild woman. I loved reading about her, which is why I think the rest of the series was a bit less interesting, because it's later in time, it's more about her children, but I think Dina herself is fascinating. So I think you can read this as a standalone, and I love this. I've read other books from this author as well, and I do love her style. So if this is not the thing for you, you can look up her other books that are available in English as well. I think there is something really magical about the way this writer writes. And then finally, I have 2 books about translation. Those I haven't read yet, but I'm very curious about. The first one is Violent Phenomena, edited by Kavita Banot and Jeremy Tying. And this is a collection of essays about translation, in particular from the perspective of colonial studies. There are 21 essays in this, not all by women, but I think it's interesting enough to recommend in this video. And again, the translation topic is very much on point. So 21 essays in this, including one from Ayesha Manazeh Siddiqui, who is the author of The Center, which is a contemporary fiction with threads of mystery, horror, sci-fi a little bit, which I really enjoyed. So also something I would recommend, even though it's not translated, it's originally in English, so unless you read it in another language, it's not going to be in translation. And then finally, this is probably more niche because this is a book in French that I don't think has been translated. This is Sur les bouts de la langue by Noémie Grunenwald, and it's basically a book about translation from a feminist angle. This is an essay that I'm very keen to get to. It's quite short as well. It sounds fascinating. The author is a translator herself, and she has translated quite a few women, including feminist essayists. So I think it's going to be quite insightful and quite fascinating to read. So if you do read French, I would highly recommend this one as well. So those were all the authors and books I wanted to talk to you about. This video was very much inspired by Ellen's video on the same topic. I watched it today and there are actually quite a bit of overlap in the recommendations, but it's because her video made me realize that actually there were quite a few books that I would want to talk about on this topic of women in translation, especially by French authors. So I hope you found some good recommendations. I will link Helen's video in the description as well in case you want to check it out. And let me know in the comments if you have some recommendations for the month of August to read some women authors in translation. And I hope you have a fantastic reading month. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.